Mr. President, I don't have necessarily a question at this moment for the good chair of the Education Committee. I do rise in strong opposition to the bill. I think where the good chair and I normally agree on many issues that come out of the Education Committee, we fundamentally disagree on the proposals that are in the piece of legislation before us right now. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that there's an old cliche that hard cases make bad law. And there should be a corollary to that, that horror stories make horrible laws. And I think that this is the case with House Bill 5468, which will ban from homeschooling any parent who winds up on a DCF blacklist of alleged child abusers. After the tragic and horrific death of Jackie Mimi Torres Garcia, some lawmakers rushed to tar all homeschoolers with the same brush. And I think that that was not the right thing to do. Upon passage, this bill will ban from homeschooling any parent who is listed on the state's central registry of alleged child abusers. Now, for those that don't necessarily understand what that means, that don't have haven't looked into that, it might conjure up a list of people convicted in court of brutalizing their children. And in fact, the reality is that one can be listed on the DCF Central Register of Alleged Child Abusers if a caseworker simply checks a box on a form declaring that she or he has, quote, reasonable cause to believe the allegation is true. Reasonable cause. And, Mr. President, overwhelmingly, the majority of the time, the allegation won't be brutal abuse, but instead neglect, which sadly often means that perhaps the family is poor and cannot adequately provide. And we all know living and surviving in Connecticut is indeed difficult for many today due to our long habits of making Connecticut unaffordable. Now, the parent can appeal, but only appeal before a parent is listed, but the only appeal before a parent is listed, goes to a hearing officer working for DCF itself. So I'm not sure how we have impartiality there. The bill would also ban from homeschooling anyone who shares a household with someone who has an open case with the Department of Children and Families. You know, we're in a time in Connecticut where it's very expensive to live. And we've talked about this. My colleagues, we've all talked about this in this chamber. And we see a lot more or growing occurrence of generational living in Connecticut. I have it in my own house. I have my senior parents, my wife and I, and my children all under the same roof. 3 generations. And we're doing that because it's something we wanted to do. It allows us to take care of each other in our respective ways. But generational living or simply maintaining cultural traditions of sharing household for whatever reasons, okay, whatever the reasons are, financial, caring for loved ones, if a person is living in a household and this person is listed on the DCF registry, the homeschooling request is denied. Wow. And in Connecticut, some statistics that I'd like to share, 25% of all children, 34% of Hispanic children, and 42% of black children will at some point be living in such a household, meaning generational living, sharing a living environment with relatives, grandpas, uncles, aunts, cousins, and overwhelmingly, the reports leading to those investigations will be found to be false. Remarkably, despite the overwhelming opposition to this bill, it is before us and already came out of the House with, we like to say bipartisan support in this chamber. It came out with bipartisan opposition as well. I'm disappointed that while the voices in this building were very loud on this issue, they somehow were not heard. And as is common too many times in this building, the loudest voices are sometimes never heard and instead attempted to be silenced or worse, drowned out by a political agenda. 2 months ago, as the good chair referenced, on the day of the public hearing, it was actually more than 19 hours that the Education Committee held that public hearing. We heard from nearly 300 people, of which all but 4 spoke in opposition to this bill. 4 people supported it. And if not for the announcement of debate being limited to 24 hours, I firmly believe we could have listened to more than 500 people speak. We saw what happened when the committee meeting, the public hearing that was going on next to us regarding, I believe it was the vaccine bill, got shut down. My colleagues here in the Senate and in the House had the courage to go and find an empty meeting room and continue the public hearing unofficially. But we had hundreds of homeschool families here, so many that we needed an overflow space to accommodate everyone. But alas, the committee chairs made a decision to limit the hearing to 24 hours, thereby most certainly silencing some voices. I mean, after all, who would wait 24 hours? Who would come up here, wait 24 hours to be heard, and then say, I'm sorry, it's been 24 hours and 1 minute. You have to go home now. We don't really care what you have to say. I'm certain this restriction had a chilling effect on many people who simply decided not to come out. But thankfully, our homeschool parents were tuned in. Our homeschool families were right on the mark, and there were more than 3,300 pieces of written testimony, largely in opposition to this bill, that were submitted online to the Education Committee webpage. And I think that is highly representative of the concerns of our homeschooling families. Some have said or suggested that this testimony came from mostly out of state, which is just not true. Some have said that national advocates for homeschooling spun up the Connecticut homeschool family community, and okay, well, that's exactly what advocates do. That's exactly, and congratulations to those national organizations who made the people that they represent aware of what was going on here in Connecticut. And that certainly does not diminish in any way the expressed concerns. I want to just take a moment to thank each parent and each child who has come to this building to advocate for their rights, for their way of life, for protecting their freedoms. All things that our founding fathers fought for 250 years ago. Your presence here tonight, I see some families in the gallery that I can see, and I know you're behind me over here. Hello. Your presence here tonight in this beautiful Capitol building and in this chamber speaks loudly once again to your resilience in protecting your rights and your genuine fear of how your rights are about to be trampled upon and violated. And for that, I am very sorry. Listening to the voices of the people that we represent as legislators, regardless of their political beliefs, their skin color, their ideologies, their religious beliefs, or any other consideration on which we may not share a common ground is at the very core of our responsibilities as legislators. Those voices inform us and should be guiding us on the decisions we make. But again, the proponents of this bill and the leaders of the majority caucuses chose to ignore those voices and to move this bill forward for final action today in the Senate. Those in favor of this legislation assert that homeschoolers homeschool so they can hide their child from abuses. I have said this already in prior discussions about this bill and I ask, what about the child who is in a public school, who is abused daily at home, is home all weekend, is home all summer, who is hidden in plain view because their abuse never reaches the threshold of being reported? Wow. Mr. President, for legislative intent, I do have a few questions for the good chair.
Senator McCrory, please prepare yourself. Please proceed, Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, through you, does the bill remove the requirement that current homeschoolers no longer have to fulfill the current State Department of Education suggested policies regarding notice of intent? Through you.
Senator McCrory.
Through you, Mr. President, can you repeat the question?
Senator Berthel.
I'd be happy to, Mr. President. Thank you. I'm asking if the policy before us for consideration right now, the bill before us, removes the requirement that current homeschoolers no longer have to fulfill the current SDE suggested policies regarding notice of intent. So notice of intent to educate outside of the public school and a private school and homeschooling. Through you.
Senator McCrory.
Currently, all homeschoolers who are currently homeschooling their children right now, actually this piece of legislation will not affect them because they will be grandfathered in. Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Berthel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. So the answer is that going forward, they do not need to file a notice of intent. Through you, Mr. President.
Senator McCrory.
Yes, through you, Mr. President.
Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the good chair. And the good chair actually anticipated my next question regarding the grandfathering of all current homeschool families. And I guess I just want to put on, again, for legislative intent, Mr. President, the grandfathering of all current homeschool families means that they are not subject to the new rules and the DCF check. Through you.
Senator McCrory.
That's absolutely correct. Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Berthel.
Mr. President, thank you. Thank you to the good chair for the answer. Mr. President, the clerk is in possession of an amendment, LCO 5902. I would ask the clerk to please call the amendment.
Mr. Clerk, will you please call the amendment?
LCO number 5902, Senate Amendment 8.
Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption of the amendment, waive the reading, and seek leave to summarize.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, very simply, this amendment removes the requirement for the DCF check from the bill. Any parent can hide a child if they truly want to do so, and the tragic events that we saw are evidence of that. This would take the DCF check off. I urge adoption of the amendment, and when the vote is taken, I ask that it be taken by roll call.
Will you remark further on the amendment? Will you remark further on the amendment?
Yes.
Senator McCrory.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I completely understand the concerns that homeschoolers have and not just homeschoolers have, that parents have when it comes to the Department of Children and Family. And I am not here to make negative comments about any agency in the state of Connecticut. But I will tell you that, you know, my ranking member stated that the percentage of individuals who are currently on the registry and the demographics of them. I can honestly say to you that people from my community do not want DCF in their business. And that's a fact. Because they're overrepresented in the system. They don't think they get the best care. They don't think that the individuals who are in charge are culturally competent, and they don't want any business of DCF in their schools. And I believe I can speak for a number of communities, not just mine. However, the concern I have is the fact that when a child is in public school, they are around mandated reporters every single day. And adults have eyes on these children. And if they feel as though that a child is being neglected, they have an obligation to make a referral to the Department of Children and Family. What we have to consider here is when this child is removed from our traditional public school, all those eyes that were on that child on a regular basis are off. The only adults that have eyes on that child is the parent and the adults that are in that household. So it's very, very, very important to know who's in that household. And that's why having the component of the Department of Children and Family exercise their responsibility of making sure the welfare of that child is intact, therein lies the need for a DCF hall. You're not going to be a case just to call and see and make sure an individual is not on that registry. And the reason why is very important, because when someone is on the child registry, it indicates that the perpetrator currently possesses a risk to the health, safety, and well-being on the child. They currently have that issue. So therefore, it's very important to know who's on the registry and why we have to have Department of DCF involved. So although I understand the concerns that my ranking member have about DCF and the concerns of many, many parents across the state, it would do us no justice not to make sure that the adult who is in charge of educating that child and adults who are in the environment where that education is being given have to be informed. So as much as I like the concept of removing DCF, I cannot support this amendment. Through you, Mr. President.
Will you remark further? Senator Berthel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the comments from the good chair. I would suggest that it is never the responsibility of a parent to have to check in with DCF to be allowed to do something for their own child. Thank you.
Will you remark further? Senator McCourt.
Well, I believe when we do accept this amendment, and I believe we will, I ask that it be taken by roll call.
Will you remark further? If not, would the clerk please announce a roll call vote? The machine will be open.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Voting on Senate Amendment A of House Bill number 5468. This is Senate Amendment A. We're not voting on the bill. This is Senate Amendment A, an act concerning the provision of parent-managed learning. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. House Bill 5468. Total number voting 35, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 24, absent not voting 1.
The amendment fails. Will you remark further on the bill as amended?
It was not amended.
Oh, will you remark further on the bill? Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm disappointed, as usual, that did not meet with good resolve and fell strictly on just about party line votes. Mr. President, last week, the Office of the Child Advocate released a horrifying, damning, and scathing report entitled The Findings and Recommendations Regarding Ongoing Deficits in the Quality of Case Practice at the Department of Children and Families. The following statement was included with the release of the report, and I think it's imperative and germane to our discussion to read it into the record here tonight. So this says, last week, the Office of the Child Advocate received notification that a child with an open investigation with the department died by apparent suicide. Based on our preliminary investigative review, this apparent self-harm occurred within 1 hour of the Department of Children and Families staff visiting the family. According to DCF records, during that visit, the child told the DCF caseworker that the child did not feel safe and asked to come into foster care. The family had a lengthy DCF history in Connecticut, did not have stable housing, had moved in and out of Connecticut over many years, and none of the children were enrolled in school. Despite these facts and all of the information available to DCF made a decision to leave the child with the parent, indicating that coming into care was not an option. OCA has opened an investigation to conduct a full review of the circumstances of this case. While it is too early to reach conclusions, our preliminary review of this case leaves us alarmed. In fact, OCA has grown increasingly alarmed at the quality of case practice observed through our reviews of critical incidents and child fatalities, some of which have not garnered significant public attention, and some of which have garnered significant public attention, and some of which have not. It is this increasing alarm, coupled with ongoing deficits in the quality of case practice, which DCF has been unable to address, that compels OCA to issue this letter of findings and recommendations. It goes on. The OCA concluded by saying the deficits in the quality of case practice must be urgently remedied. There is not one statutory change that can address these issues. Rather, doing so will require concerted effort by DCF executive leadership, commitment to caseworkers, both by DCF executive leadership and the legislature, to ensure they have the support they need to meet expectations, and ongoing external oversight and accountability. I can't tell you how much this angers me, Mr. President. I'm upset. I'm fearful for the children of Connecticut that interact with this agency. The amendment that I just offered would have removed DCF from the equation. I'm disappointed that contemporaneously with the disturbing findings of the Office of the Child Advocate, that we would continue to give authority tonight, give more authority to an agency that has been deemed a total failure and in need of wholesale reforms. How remarkably insulting to every citizen of the state of Connecticut, and now tonight to our homeschooling community, parents and students. Mr. President, earlier this year, during a public hearing, the Child Advocate stated that Matthew Tradato, because I'll say his name, who died at the hands of his mother, was not removed from school for homeschooling. But yes, this was largely the basis for the recommendation for the need for regulation of homeschoolers. Why? Well, DCF failed Mr. Tradato. May he rest in peace. Not homeschooling. In the same hearing, the Child Advocate also stated publicly that the real cause of these tragic events regarding children is a catastrophic failure of the Department of Children and Families. That's a direct quote from the Child Advocate. And now we have her report that I just read from as evidence. So again, Mr. President, it begs the question, after reviewing this information from the child advocate and the comments she made publicly, why, as prescribed in the bill on the floor right now, we would want DCF to be involved in any way at all in the evaluation, monitoring, or regulation of homeschoolers, when the very agency we would authorize to do so has demonstrated they cannot handle the cases they are already monitoring, and they are making catastrophic mistakes that are causing harm to and the death of children in their care. Wow. Mr. President, the clerk is in possession of LCO 5912. I would ask the clerk to please call the amendment.
LCO number 5912, Senate Amendment B.
Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption of the amendment, waive the reading, and seek leave to summarize.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this amendment would actually make a substantial change to DCF. It would ultimately require us to seek permission from and the authority of the U.S. Department of Education to make the Department of Children's and Family an education entity for the purposes of administering this legislation. And if the federal government says no, then no part of this bill would go into effect. You know, the sharing of information about students is regulated by the U.S. Department of Education under the authority of FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. And I'm not certain that DCF sharing information about the status of an adult who lives in a household where a student desires to be homeschooled doesn't violate FERPA. This amendment would make DCF an authorized agency. Mr. President, I urge adoption of the amendment, and when the vote is taken, I ask that it be taken by roll call.
A roll call vote will be ordered. Will you remark further? Senator McCord.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And through you, Mr. President, fortunately, we already have in our statutes, DCF under statute 17A-3B-C, DCF is a state education authority under FERPA currently and may receive the educational records of children who are withdrawn from school. So with that being said, we currently do this already. So again, I ask that, this amendment is not necessary because we already do it. So through you, Mr. President, I ask that my colleagues reject the amendment and we move forward. Thank you.
Will you remark further on the amendment? Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, will the clerk... I'm sorry, Senator Martin.
Yes, thank you. Mr. President, I don't believe that FERPA would cover the individuals that are living in the house. Maybe they have access to, DCF could have access to the educational records if they're kept by the parents. But regarding the actual looking into the backgrounds of the people to the house, I don't believe this statute would protects them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? Will you remark further? If not, would the clerk please announce a roll call vote? The machine will be open.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment B of House Bill number 5468. This is a vote on the amendment. This is Senate Amendment B of House Bill number 5468, and that concerning the provision of parent-managed learning. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment B, House Bill 5468. Total number vote 36, total voting yea, 11, total voting nay, 25. Absent not voting, 0.
The amendment fails. Will you remark further on the bill? Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another common sense amendment to address applicability of the proposed policy in this bill, that it's rejected on party lines. You know, it's a fact that during the public hearing, we most certainly heard from homeschool families of all political views. It is also a fact that we heard from people of all colors, religious backgrounds, and varying other beliefs. I firmly believe for our homeschooling families, this was never a Republican versus Democrat or Democrat versus Republican issue. But sadly, I think, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I've been in this room for enough years to know that just like the vote in the House last week, the vote in the Senate will ultimately almost certainly fall largely on party lines. And here we are, considering this bill that would subject every homeschooling family to a background check by the Department of Children and Families before beginning to homeschool. Absurd, insulting, truly wrong given the current state of affairs with this agency. It's not after evidence of abuse, not in response to a specific concern, but instead as a condition of carrying out basic responsibility of parenthood. In this case, choosing the best education method for your own child. And in effect, now the state must clear you before you may begin to teach your own child. And you know, Mr. President, this is a profound shift. I started out by saying I'm not a lawyer, but I do know how to read, and I do understand law, and I can pull it very, very succinctly into the majority of my conversation for the rest of this bill tonight. The U.S. Supreme Court has described this kind of presumption that we are taking on tonight as repugnant to the American tradition. Like many such proposals, this bill is described simply as a modest response to tragic cases of children being abused. Every case of child abuse is devastating and morally urgent. So any serious discussion must begin there, but it cannot end there. The 1979 Supreme Court decision in Parham versus JR did not arise in the context of education. It concerned a difficult question about when a parent may admit a child for mental health treatment. Yet precisely because the stakes were so high, the High Court spoke with unusual clarity about the starting point for any state intervention into parent-child decision-making. Mr. President, it began with a principle older than any civil government, quoting Pierce versus the Society of Sisters in 1925, where they said, quote, "The child is not the mere creature of the state," end quote. That line marks a boundary. The state may have interest in the welfare of children, but it does not possess children. Parents do not exercise their role at the pleasure of a regulatory scheme like the one before us tonight. They fulfill a duty that precedes the state. They do not co-parent with the state. Then the court explained why the law has long trusted parents. We apparently don't trust our parents with this bill. But the High Court explained why the law has long trusted parents. They said historically it is recognized that the natural bonds of affection lead parents to act in the best interest of their children. Historically, it has recognized that the natural bonds of affection lead parents to act in the best interest of their children. HB 5468 starts and proceeds from a very different and disturbing premise. by requiring every parent to be pre-screened before they can begin homeschooling. It turns parents from trusted actors into potential risks to be managed. That is not our role. That is not the role of the state of Connecticut. The court in Parham anticipated precisely this reasoning and rejected it. It acknowledged plainly that some parents may at times be acting against the interest of their children. That is the hard reality invoked today. But the court's response is decisive. This fact creates a basis for caution, not a license to discard wholesale the long-recognized governing presumption. And that is where HB 5468 departs most sharply from our legal tradition. It takes the exception, the rare but real examples of abuse, and uses it to justify a universal screening regime. But that move, Mr. President, alters the relationship between family and state. And the court drew the line in unmistakable terms. They said the status notion that governmental power should supersede parental authority in all cases because some parents abuse and neglect their children is repugnant to American tradition. The word repugnant reflects a decisive judgment about a view that is fundamentally incompatible with our constitutional tradition. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines repugnant as, quote, causing a strong feeling of distaste or aversion. Seems the court was correct in their usage. A system that begins by distrusting every parent because of the misconduct of a few is not merely overbroad, it is totally out of line. This is not the role of the state. Mr. President, the clerk is in possession of LCO 5909. I ask the clerk to please call the amendment. 5909.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO 5909, Senate Amendment C.
Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption of the amendment, waive the reading, and seek leave to summarize.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this amendment would require DCF to inform the parents directly that the child cannot be withdrawn from school instead of the school district. The amendment would require DCF to interact, again, directly with and inform parents that their child cannot be withdrawn from school instead of placing that responsibility on the superintendent or their designee. This creates an appropriate separation between the school system and parents who don't want to be involved with the school system. It also creates the appropriate connection between DCF and the parent regarding the reason for the denial. Mr. President, I urge adoption of the amendment, and when the vote is taken, I ask that it be taken by roll call.
A roll call vote will be ordered. Will you remark further? Will you remark further? Senator McCoy.
Again, Mr. President, I think the mechanisms that we have in place are sufficient enough, and I think this will probably not necessarily do us no harm, but I think we have a concept in place already that satisfies the needs of the parents, the school, and the agency, DCF. And I also just added, I just want to say for the record that my colleague mentioned about the work and responsibility of the Department of Children and Family. I concur. I think DCF needs a lot of more support, a lot more training, and I believe there is money in the budget to provide that support and training for DCF. So with that being said, Mr. President, I ask my colleagues not to accept the amendment, and when we vote, let it be voted by roll call. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McCrory. Will you remark further on the amendment? Seeing not, would the clerk please announce a roll call vote? The machine will be open.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. The immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment C, House Bill number 5468, and that concerning the provisions of parent-managed learning. This is a vote on the amendment. This is Senate Amendment C of House Bill number 5468. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate on Senate Amendment C for House Bill number 5468. This is not the bill. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. Senate Amendment C of House Bill 5468. Total number voted 35, total voting yea 10, total voting nay 25, absent not voting 1.
The amendment fails. Will you remark further on the bill? Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another party line rejection of a good amendment. If this bill passes tonight, which I, again, don't have a crystal ball, but guessing probably will, we'll have the same exact total on the screen, and it's signed by Governor Lamont, all families would be prevented from beginning to homeschool until a DCF screening was completed. Repugnant indeed. It would be a barrier based on a generalization and a generalized suspicion of all parents, rather than specific concerning evidence about some parents, in direct contradiction to the Supreme Court's ruling in Parham. That is the central problem. The question then is not whether child abuse exists. It does. The question is how a free society responds to that evil without abandoning the freedom that makes human flourishing possible. Mr. President, as we approach the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, we are reminded of a central tenet of the American experiment, that unalienable rights endowed by our Creator precede government itself, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The founders saw here a life shaped by virtue, responsibility, and purpose. They saw human flourishing, and they assumed this life begins with the family, not with the state. Rather, the state is charged with guarding the freedom that makes flourishing possible, not to abdicate freedom to the whims of the state. HB 5468 reframes that long-standing principle. Trust in parents is replaced with suspicion. Freedom is not the starting point, but a risk to be managed. Liberty must be approved before it can be exercised. The law, as the good chair spoke to, already provides tools to protect children where there is evidence of harm, and those tools should be used vigorously and without hesitation. But that is very different from treating every family as a potential threat to their own child. What is at stake in HB 5468 is not simply homeschooling, but the meaning of liberty itself. It is a problem to be managed. Or is it a problem to be managed, or a good to be preserved? Is the family the starting point, or is the state the starting point? We can protect children without reversing the presumption of trust in parents. We can enforce the law without redefining liberty as a liability. And we can act decisively where evidence demands it without imposing suspicion where none exist. That is the balance of our American tradition. That is the balance our American tradition has struck. And HB 5468 should not abandon it now. Mr. President, the bill violates the fundamental rights of parents under the First and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution. I am certain, as sure as I am standing here tonight, there will be lawsuits that ensue after this bill is signed by the governor. It is my belief that HB 5468, if passed, would substantially burden both the fundamental rights of parents to privately educate their children and the right of religious parents to provide instruction to their children consistent with their sincere beliefs. Mr. President, undoubtedly, child abuse can be unquestionably severe, and the state has legitimate and compelling interest in protecting children when that occurs. But HB 5468 extends far beyond this core protective function. Rather than targeting only parents who have been found to have committed serious abuse, the bill imposes a mandatory waiting period on all families who wish to withdraw their children to homeschool, and imposes a bar on any homeschooling for any family with a parent whose name appears on that registry. And there are two fundamental problems with this approach. First, the bill imposes a mandatory waiting period on all families who wish to homeschool. This delay applies even to families against whom there is no allegation of abuse or neglect. But HB 5468 does exactly that. Placement on the state's registry is purely an administrative decision, not a judicial one. As I spoke to earlier, checking a box. And it can occur based on a wide range of substantiated allegations, including many unrelated to the child's safety or a parent's ability to teach. Because substantiated allegations of neglect comprise over 70% of all substantiated allegations, and neglect findings may range from minor to more serious. Registry status does not reliably reflect abuse, parental incapacity, or educational unsuitability. It just doesn't. By treating registry placement as conclusive proof of parental neglect or unfitness, HB 5468 effectively transforms a child protective mechanism into a broad restriction on fundamental constitutional rights. This is not the role of the state. HB 5468 effectively imposes a universal administrative barrier to homeschooling in two ways. Any parent who seeks to withdraw their child from public school to homeschool is subject to a mandatory waiting period, whether the parent has been accused of neglect or not. I've already said it a couple of times, I'm saying it again. The bill imposes a mandatory child abuse and neglect registry check during that waiting period. And if any parent in the household appears on the registry, the family is categorically barred from homeschooling with no mechanism to appeal the decision. The scope of this restriction is also compounded by two additional factors. First, the state of Connecticut defines neglect broadly. It may involve serious issues where a child's health or well-being is injured, but it also includes any situation where a child is being denied proper care and attention physically, educationally, emotionally, or morally. The breadth of this definition makes neglect more difficult to capture and more susceptible to that subjective judgment I spoke about when we started this debate. And to be sure, some registry placements may involve grave abuse that could justify restrictions. But HB 5468 does not distinguish those cases from far less disputed matters. Because the definition is so broad, the neglect that DCF finds may have nothing to do at all with a serious safety concern or even the parent's ability to teach a child at home. This is just one of the reasons why the categorical use of neglect as a type of maltreatment has been criticized as overly broad and highly subjective. As I said earlier on, placement on the registry is almost always the result of an administrative finding rather than a judicial determination. As a result, mere placement on the registry is not a reliable indicator of actual abuse, serious neglect, or a parent's ability to teach. Statistics show that states that use lower evidentiary thresholds have a much higher registry placement rate. Imagine that. And a much higher reversal rate on appeal than states that use the more rigorous preponderance of the evidence standard. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that for sure. Again, Mr. President, I'm going to go into some court history. Not a lawyer, but found this and found it very interesting and germane. In Valmonte versus Bain, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, which includes Connecticut, considered a class action claim that brought a 14th Amendment due process challenge against New York's process for placing individuals on the state's child abuse register. The Second Circuit concluded that a low threshold for registry inclusion created an unacceptable high risk of error. The court concluded that New York's some credible evidence did not require the fact finder to weigh conflicting evidence. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I think I understand what that means as well, and that's not good. This rendered the standard especially dubious for making determinations of neglect, which are inherently inflammatory and unusually open to the subjective values of the fact finder. All from the court. As evidence of this disparity, Valmonte noted that when the much stronger preponderance standard was used on appeal, and hearing officers had to balance the evidence from both sides, nearly 75% of those seeking removal from the registry were successful. 75%. And as the Second Circuit concluded, 75% of those challenging their inclusion on the list were successful. We cannot help but be skeptical of the fairness of the original determination. And that's exactly what we're going to do here in Connecticut with the passage of 5468. And the court acknowledged the grave seriousness of the problems of child abuse and neglect and the need for the state to maintain a central register. It, however, concluded that New York's registry placement process was constitutionally unacceptable. Let's hope the court finds the same ruling about this bill before us. Valmonte's concerns continue to be borne out by empirical research. In 2021, an article in the Central University of New York Law Review conducted an exhaustive review of child registry laws in all 50 states and concluded that states with lower standards of proof, like Connecticut, continue to have higher substantiation rates than do states that utilize higher standards of proof. Shocking. And that reversal rates of substantiation upon administrative appeal confirm this concern. From the court, not a legislator, from the court. Put simply, lower thresholds lead to more placements, and many of those placements do not survive later review. So, Mr. President, there are serious flaws in the core principle of HB 5468. Placement on a child abuse or neglect registry does not necessarily establish actual abuse, serious misconduct, or parental inability to educate a child. A registry may include parents associated with a wide range of allegations, from severe abuse to lower risk neglect findings. Allegations which may have occurred years ago and have no present bearing on the child's safety or, again, the parent's ability to teach. HB 5468 will raise serious constitutional concerns. These structural flaws raise serious constitutional concerns. The United States Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized the liberty protected by the Due Process Clause includes the right of parents to establish a home and bring up children, and to control the education of their own. The United States Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized the liberty protected by the Due Process Clause includes the right of parents to establish a home and bring up children and to control the education of their own. It's that important to be read aloud twice. A law like HB 5468, which imposes mandatory waiting periods on all parents simply because some parents abused their children in the past, is inconsistent with constitutional principles. The burden is even more pronounced for families seeking homeschooling for religious reasons. In Wisconsin versus Yoder, the court recognized that parental authority over a child's education intersects with the free exercise clause when parents seek to provide instruction consistent with their faith. Yoder held that the values of parental direction of the religious upbringing and education of their children in their early and formative years have a high place in our society, and that only interest of the highest order can overbalance legitimate free exercise claims. And last year, Muhammad versus Taylor reaffirmed the critical right of parents to guide the religious development of their children and warned that government schools may not place unconstitutional burdens on religious exercise. Mr. President, while protecting children from abuse is a compelling state interest, registry placement alone is too blunt a proxy to override these rights. And as Belmonte explained, such systems can result in many individuals being placed on the list who do not belong there. Placement on the registry does not necessarily establish serious abuse, educational unfitness, or current danger to a child. Nor is such a categorical rule a narrowly tailored means of protecting children. Less restrictive alternatives are readily available, including case-by-case review, perhaps not by DCF because we know that they don't do a very good job of that. Time limits, severity distinctions, or hearings focused on present educational fitness, all of which would be far more effective in protecting the actual child at issue. Where a law burdens fundamental parental and religious liberty interest, mere placement on a registry is not enough to prevent parents from exercising their constitutional rights. Mr. President, the clerk is in possession of an amendment, LCO 5914. I ask the clerk to please call the amendment, 5914.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 5914, Senate Amendment D.
Senator Berthel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move adoption of the amendment, waive the reading, and seek leave to summarize.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is a simple amendment to ensure that the Education Committee, in consultation with the State Department of Education, is creating and using forms that do not violate FERPA or any other rights of the student or family, or that they are collecting data that is not necessary or a violation of privacy. These are to address the forms that are being created in Section 2 of the bill. Mr. President, I urge adoption of the amendment, and when the vote is taken, I ask that it's taken by roll.
A roll call vote will be ordered. Will you remark further? Will you remark further? Senator McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, again, I believe this will add to already limited version of how this should take place. But I do want to mention a couple of things that my colleague said. and I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier. Being placed on the central registry indicates that the perpetrator currently possesses a risk to the health, safety, and well-being of children, and DCF must consider the severity and the intent. So being on the registry is something we can't take lightly. However, there is a provision in place with this piece of legislation. There is an appeal process, and I would say that there are people who are probably on the registry currently right now for something that took place 10, 15, 20 years ago that would not place them on the registry today. Circumstances have changed, systems have changed, reasons have changed. So one good thing about this piece of legislation is the fact that people who are on the registry and they might not even know they're on the registry can appeal and get off the registry. So that's one thing that's really good about this legislation. Also, and I will say this, and I didn't say at the beginning, I've always said that parents know what's best for their children. And if they want to homeschool their children, they should do that. But we just want to make sure the environment that they're homeschooling their children in is safe. So I believe the mechanisms that we have in place with the withdrawal form and the intent to educate form is good, and I believe there's not a need for another extra step through the process. So with that being said, Mr. President, I ask my colleagues to not to support this amendment, and when the vote is taken, have it taken by roll call.
Will you remark further? If not, would the clerk please announce a roll call vote? The machine will be open.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're now voting on Senate Amendment D. This is a vote on the amendment. This is Senate Amendment D for House Bill number 5468. The immediate roll call vote in the Senate on Senate Amendment D for House Bill number 5468. Senate Amendment D of House Bill 5468. Total vote voted 35, total voting yea 10, total voting nay 25, absent not voting 1.
The amendment fails.
Will you remark further? Will you remark further? Senator Berthel, please proceed, sir.
I just got used to saying Mr. President, Madam President, so welcome back. Here you are. Welcome back. Good to see you. Yes, Madam President, I will remark further. I'll say something that I know the good chair and I enjoy hearing in public hearings. In conclusion, and I don't want to lose sight of the I don't want to lose sight of some of the comments that the good chair has made as well regarding some of his concerns about the legislation before us. Madam President, I would say clearly that we all believe protecting children is an urgent and legitimate goal. But this bill creates, it creates a system that conditions fundamental rights on registry placement and does not meaningfully advance the goal of protecting children, given how imprecise and error-prone those placement decisions are. Where fundamental rights are at stake, the Constitution requires more than administrative convenience. And as I spoke to a moment ago, the First and 14th Amendments require a degree of precision that HB 5468 does not provide. Homeschooling families should not be singled out for special surveillance and discrimination in the name of making everyone feel better after a child abuse horror. And it should not be lost on anyone the horror of those examples of child abuse that we have seen in our state. I would say, Madam President, instead, let all the time and effort that would be directed to this pointless new form of family policing be directed towards strengthening prevention when Poverty is confused with neglect, and strengthening investigation when something more than a family's educational choices raise suspicion. Madam President, I urge my colleagues to reject this bill tonight. Sadly, we will likely see the same exact tally on the board when this bill is finally called for a vote. This is not an appropriate time to be doing this given the train wreck that is the Department of Children and Families. This is an unfair and unjust attack on families who want to educate their children as they see fit, whether for cultural, family, religious, or ideological reasons. This is an assault on the freedoms inherent to the basic foundation of our country, formed and promised 250 years ago. I urge rejection. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.